It's time for another episode of Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington. And on my very, very first episode, I had the pleasure of talking to Skylar, who is my kid, my middle kid. And a lot of people found that episode really, really interesting, partially because Skylar is, a good talker, but also at 20 has a lot to say and a lot of thoughts around where the world is today. And I thought, what better than to have this episode be with my oldest, my firstborn, and talk a little bit about where the world sits with them. And I am going to let you introduce yourself. Da, 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 da.
Well, my name is Shay. I am Erika's lovely oldest child. I'm 24 years old. I am currently an early childhood educator on a college campus. I just recently graduated last year, and I primarily work with 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. I'm currently in my first year teaching, and I'm having a lot of fun, but I'm also learning a lot about myself. And a lot about the education world in particular, so I'm excited to talk.
So, what was your degree in?
My degree was in Human Development and Family Studies. It's a really fancy way of saying it's a mix between child psychology and sociology. So I essentially studied the dynamics of families and marriages, and then on top of that also learned about childhood development, and it all kind of culminated together into me having this very large expertise about both family dynamics and child development in particular.
And so when you chose that major, did you do that with the idea that you were going to go into education, into teaching?
Absolutely. I originally had started college in 2017, starting in elementary education. And so when I started with elementary education, I liked it, but I also knew that I didn't want to be a teacher that stood in front of a chalkboard, that stood in front of a whiteboard and taught to students sitting in desks. And so I think that's where the disconnect was. And then as a recommendation as a freshman, they always tell you to take a variety of classes. And one day I took a class under the HDFS umbrella, and I literally fell in love with it. I was like, what is this? I need to know more about this major, more about this degree. And I talked to my advisor and immediately switched within my first semester. And so I knew that I wanted to be in education, but I also knew that I didn't want to be, what's the word? I wanted to work in an unorthodox type of teaching. I didn't want it to be what you usually associate with teaching, which again is those teachers that stand in front of chalkboards and whiteboards, which is not to say that that's not hard. That's all teaching is hard in any capacity, but I also knew that I wanted to teach in a way that wasn't the usual way.
What was such a turnoff to orthodox teaching?
I feel like the lecture-based style of teaching, when you're standing in front of someone, especially children, because I also knew that I didn't want to work with anyone older, probably than like the age of, before I would say 8, now I think it's down to like 6. I didn't want to work with anyone that was above the elementary age. When you get to middle school and high school, you are essentially talking at people, and that's how lecture-based styles always felt to me, is talking at people. And especially when you get to the younger and younger ages, I just don't think that it's suitable for kids that young, especially with the field that I ended up in, which I can't say that I knew I would end up with preschool, but my original target was kindergarten. And when you're talking about 5-year-olds learning to read, and you're talking about a lot of these fundamental skills that like are really, really hard to teach children, I can't imagine standing in front of a chalkboard is the correct way to do it. And something within me was telling me that I wouldn't be able to do it, that I just wouldn't have fun. I wouldn't feel fulfilled. And I really enjoy being a preschool teacher, working with 3s and 4s, working in early childhood, because a lot of it is learning through play. And so a lot of what I'm working with my kiddos on is those early reading skills, those early math skills, but we're doing it right with building blocks. We're doing it with these fun stories. We're doing it with oral storytelling. I'm trying to get my kids to tell stories back to me that I have told them. When we're talking about measuring, we're stacking up these big crates outside and then we're knocking them over. And it's this really fun, energetic play that you would normally have with young children that is so exciting, but you're also introducing those skills at the same time. And you can see those concepts connect with them. And I just think that I wouldn't have found that same passion if I had to go off of a binder full of lesson plans and had to stand in front of a chalkboard and be like, 2 + 2 is 4. You should know that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think, I know because I know you, but it feels, even I think if I didn't know you and we were having this conversation, that you really love the idea of teaching. You love the job. So you're rounding up your first year as a full-time grown-up teacher. Now, how do you feel about it? Do you feel the same way you did going in on day one?
I do. I do think a lot about me has shifted just even within this first year. I think that because I had dipped my toes into teaching, right? This is my first year full-time teaching, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. with my kids 40 hours a week. Well, beforehand, I was a student, and so I would kind of pop in and out of classrooms, right? And so I feel like being able to spend 40 hours a week with my students and create that repertoire of like, you are the child that's looking up to me, that is relying on me to say, you are ready for the next part. You know what I mean? It's kind of daunting, but it's also unbelievably like fulfilling. That's the best word I can put it, but even that doesn't describe all of it. You know what I mean? Like, each child that I have ever interacted with has an entire piece of my heart. And I see so much potential in every single young child that comes into my classroom. Like, I had a new student start today, one of my favorite kids. You know what I mean? And I only met him today. Like, he's my student today. I've only known him for the past 9 hours. He's already stolen my heart. You know what I mean? I will say that within this first year of teaching, I have learned to be more disciplined with myself. I have learned to not only walk my kids through the hard things in life, but also trying to figure out how to walk myself through the hard things in life. Because I feel like that's also a part of early childhood education in particular that not a lot of people talk about. When you're talking about teaching, you're talking about kids, right? Of course, you're talking about teaching them to read, teaching them to count, teaching them to add, all these basic skills that they'll need moving forward. But you're also talking about like life skills. You're talking about social skills. The amount of times that I have to walk up to kiddos and I have to separate like arguments, I have to separate these social situations in which none of them are like bad at social situations, but they're new at them. They've only been here for 3-4 years. It's hard. Having arguments with people is hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do actually. I think it makes me think about, there are adults I know who don't have good coping skills and know how to argue well or have good social skills
Exactly.
whatsoever.
Exactly.
So the amount of expectations we put on 3-year-olds to have, strong social skills is kind of amazing, I think.
And a lot of it is like, we expect kids to just figure out like, well, it's just sharing, like just share the toys, just share them. But I'm walking into situations where it's like, this kid had something, the other child wanted to use it. That child asked and that other child said, you need to wait till I'm done. And then that child has a hard time waiting. Like, there's a lot that goes into these situations where it's like, well, now I have to learn patience because I have to wait for this person to be done with whatever I need. Oh, well, I didn't like the way that person spoke to me. How do I tell them that without screaming my head off. And even as an adult, I don't even know how to do that, right? When someone talks to me sideways, your first thought is to scream. Your first thought is to yell. And even I, as a 24-year-old grown adult, have to take a step back to be like, all right, Shay, let's take a breath. Is this worth it? How do we communicate in a healthy way? And I'm also in the seat of being a mentor to teach these 3-year-olds how to do the exact same thing, which means they're also watching me at the exact same time, which means I also have to double check my behavior, because I know that there is a young child looking at me being like, oh, this is how teacher Shay deals with this. Maybe this is the right way to do it.
Yeah. I feel like you're getting that crash course in parenting that I never got without being a parent first, but you get the idea of seeing that they are seeing everything that you do, and you are at the same time still trying to figure your own self out while giving guidance to somebody else. And I always say that's the hardest part, because there's not a lot of deference in that.
Absolutely.
So what's your favorite part of the day?
I feel like it would be slightly corny to say this, but the beginning. I feel like no matter how hard the day before was, no matter how tired I am, no matter how many arguments I had to break up, no matter how many, because of course they're young children, no matter how many ridiculous things I had to deal with, like kids throw things in the toilet, or kids are jumping off of things that they shouldn't be, because they're young children and they do things that as an adult I'm like, please don't do that. Like, I'm shaking my head, I'm like, this is a safety concern, please stop doing whatever you are doing. No matter how hard the day was before, though, there's nothing that warms my heart more than walking into my classroom and hearing the chorus of children that are like, Teacher Shay, you're here. Because they're always hoping that I come back the next day. And I don't ever want them to feel like I won't come back the next day. But it to know that when I walk in, they are so excited to see me. They are so happy to see me. I run up, and I could probably, it would probably take me a while to count how many choruses of Teacher Shay and the running up that they do to hug me. It would take me forever to count how many times they do that. And I'm even at the point, my kids,
club.
a little bit, but it's funny because I'll walk in at 9 a.m. and they could be completely interested in something else. Sometimes I don't get there until after the kids do, because that's just how the schedule works. The school that I work at opens at 7:30. I arrive around 9 to get the curriculum and the day started and whatnot. And so they're already kind of playing, and they're hanging out with, my co-teachers, and they're hanging out with their friends and whatnot. But I come in, and it doesn't matter if I come in quietly. It doesn't matter if I come in and I say good morning. They are excited to see me either way. And they run up and they hug me, and they're so excited to find out what activities I have in store for the day. What are we doing today, Teacher Shay? Are we going to go on a walk today? Are we going to paint a picture today? And it could be the simplest thing. I could just have paint for them to paint a picture. That could be it. I could just have crayons just for them to draw a picture. And they're excited just to have me sit with them and draw with them. They are so excited to show me all of the things that they've done, to tell me about all the things that they do at home. My kids are so excited to share their life with me all of the time.
Well, kids usually run their mouth. Sometimes they share a little too much.
They do, but I can also tell that sometimes it comes from a place of pride, where they'll come to me and they're like, Teacher Shay, I have a kiddo who just recently started doing soccer. They started playing on a soccer team, and they were really nervous about it at first. They told me about it, and they were really excited, but they were really nervous about it. And then when they came back the next day, they were so excited to tell me, Teacher Shay, I kicked the ball. I kicked it, and it went into the goal. And I could just tell the look on their face was just so, so excited. They were so excited to tell me in particular that they had done this thing, and that they wanted me to know how exciting they was that they had done this thing. On the flip side, I can say that sometimes can be very daunting, because I think just like any other, and I think it's funny that you had mentioned that it's kind of a crash course in parenting, because I think to an extent it is. They aren't my kids, but they're also my kids. And so when I don't show up for them the way that they expect me to, I can see the way that it affects them. When they're really excited to tell me something, but it's like the middle of the day and I'm trying to put kids down for a nap, or I'm trying to clean up something and And it's overwhelming and I'm getting overstimulated and I need to step out and I need to take a breather and I don't have the opportunity to do that yet. And they run up to me and they're like, Teacher Shay, I did this thing. And I'm like, friend, that's so great. Teacher Shay needs a minute. And you can tell in their face, they're like, oh, that was not the reaction I wanted. And there are quite a few times that I, as a grown up, have to model, a proper apology, a proper checking in on someone, by walking up to them and asking them, like, is everything okay? And they're like, I told you about this, but you weren't excited. And explaining to them, I'm really sorry I was not excited for you, friend. Teacher Shay is really tired right now, but if you can give me 5 minutes, we can talk about it later, and making sure that I make it up to them. So it's not only that modeling, but it's also I think that a lot of the times we forget that children are people. They are people who are simply developing, and they are trying to find themselves the same way that each and every one of us are. I am still trying to find myself as a 24-year-old because I am, in my early 20s and I still have a lot to figure out, but so do these kiddos. And so they are looking for that same human emotional support that the rest of us are. And it's really important that we continue to treat them like people. And there are some times that even I, as an adult, have to remember that. I have to remember, as much as this is my student that I am in charge of, that I have to make sure we stick to our curriculum and our schedule and is learning and is hitting these, educational goals, because that's my job. This is also a person who considers me to be one of their, mentors, one of their grown-up friends in a sense. They're looking at me for that emotional support the same way I would look to one of my own friends for emotional support. And there are some times in which, I let them down and I have to make that up to them, because it's not fair not to. You know what I mean? Because I don't want to model that for them. I don't want them to feel like,
no,
when someone lets me down, that's okay, because it's not.
So let's transition into these letdowns. Thinking about teachers as a whole in the industry, it's not known as being a lucrative job. It's not known as, I don't know that you'll be making $1 million next year. If you do, call your mama. But if you are, but
if I get offered a raise for $1 million, you're the first person I'm going to call.
Good. I hope you will. And I'll help you negotiate to 1.2. But I think, there's always these conversations around teachers not being appreciated, that they're being undervalued, praised, underpaid for such important roles. And you sitting here talking about how you feel about your students, how you feel about a brand new student, proves that point that, for people who love this work, that's who you want to do it. You don't want somebody to just take the job because they don't have anything else to do or they don't have any other options. You want teachers who actually care. However, paying them doesn't seem to be a priority. But I wanted to ask you, why do you believe the industry isn't respected more?
I will say that I have a particular gripe with the way that the industry is seen, right? I'm an early childhood educator. In particular, I work with very, very young children. My age group right now is 3 to 4, but I also got my degree, which means I can work easily with 2-year-olds, infants, anywhere between, kindergarten through 2nd grade. And I feel like those lower grades in particular are very much seen as jobs in which I just hang out and play with children, right? I feel like I told people I'm a preschool teacher and they're like, oh, that's cute. So you just play blocks, you play hide and seek, you just read them stories and put them down for a nap, which it's like, yes, I do put them down for a nap. Yes, we play with blocks, but I am also testing my kids because they are getting ready for kindergarten, in which they need to know how to read. They need to recognize their name. They need to recognize letters and numbers. And there are so many different baseline skills that you learn in early childhood. Number one, that I could never consider this job to be easy under any circumstances whatsoever. It's even harder because like I mentioned before, I don't ever want to be a lecture-based learning teacher. But I'm not going to lie, it would make my job easier if I could just tell my children how to read and then they didn't. You know what I mean? Like if I could just tell a child, this is how you read, and they got it, that would make my job 10 times easier, right? So we're also learning through play, not just because it's a revolutionary way to teach, but because it's kind of out of necessity. Kids don't learn, at least the ones in my age cohort, don't learn through lecture whatsoever. So I have to find new creative ways to teach, which 9 times out of 10 means working off the clock. I'm doing research while I'm at home. I am, saving my Instagram and my Pinterest, while are my own social media pages are also full of feeds that are like preschool teacher stuff. Even when I get home, my teacher hat's not off. I'm always wearing it. And even while I'm talking about early childhood education, I cannot imagine that that's any different for any teacher past the second grade. You're getting into, the rest of elementary school, middle school, high school. You're also doing the exact same thing. You are trying tirelessly to figure out how to make sure that kids are staying on track. When you have a group of 20 children, my class roster is 20 kids. I have to figure out how to make sure all 20 of my kids are on the same track by the end of the year. And when you get into higher grades, those class sizes are even higher. You know what I mean? Like, now you're getting into like 30 kids, 35 kids. Like, it's just a lot of kids to make sure they are all on the same track. You have to know them individually. You have to know them as a whole. And I cannot imagine that this job is easy to anybody, but it has been constantly kind of, what's the word? Promoted, I guess, as like this career that's easy to pick up, right? I know people, as much as I work really hard and I love my job and everything else, I have also met people that are like, well, I'm doing this because I need the money. I'm doing this because it was easy to get a teaching license and I'm just going to do it. How hard could teaching be? And it's always bewildering to me that people would ever do that, because you're doing a disservice to the families that you serve. And then on top of that, it makes the good teachers not want to be here. When you have decided that teaching can be for anybody, which that's not to say that not everyone can teach. Not teaching is not, I believe that anybody can teach if they really wanted to, but teaching is not for everybody. It's not, and it shouldn't be.
No, and I know that I would never be a teacher. I couldn't do it. This is what I know. I feel like you were always very transparent with me growing up. That was like, I don't have the patience to be a teacher. I don't have even when it just came to me and like my homework growing up. And I'll find somebody to help you do the thing.
But
I mean, if it's something I can, then I will, but
right. But it's okay to admit, when you don't have that skill set. But this is a career that's also being promoted to people who don't have that skill set. And it's like, well, just do it. We just need teachers. And a lot of the times it's just a matter of just filling positions, just filling seats. I feel like, especially within COVID, like teachers struggled. And I can't imagine being a teacher in the age of COVID, especially with the age group that I work with. Like, I feel like elementary and kindergarten and early childhood, like trying to figure out how to remotely teach.
But what was that like for you? What was that like for you during COVID? You were in college. What was COVID like for you?
I was in college during COVID, and it was really strange. I will say, I feel like it was a lawless land, to be quite honest. Like, I feel like anything was acceptable. I feel like it was just like everyone was in this mind frame of just trying to survive. It was very terrifying to be in your home and not be able to leave, but then also to have to get on a Zoom call with an advisor and be like, so how long is it going to take for me to graduate? Because there was also a thought in my brain that was like, is it going to matter? Is it going to matter if I graduate? What is the world going to look like in 2 years? I don't even really know. My advisor's like, well, if you take this class and this class, you could graduate in this year. And I'm like, what's going to happen to me when I do graduate? where are we going to be? Are we going to be back in a classroom? Are we going to have to figure out how we're going to do this?
Did any counselors ever address that with you all? Like the existential crisis of COVID and undergraduate students?
I feel like it was a topic that everyone kind of beat around the bush a lot. Like it was just this idea. It's like, we are in COVID, and people would say it like just with that pause of like, it's the times of COVID. Like COVID was a bad word for a while. I do remember that. I feel like that was the weirdest part, was that we were all on Zoom calls and the professor wouldn't even say COVID. They were like, if you were sick, take care of yourself. And you should email me and let me know how sick
that you're still alive.
Right. It was just very strange. I remember being in my classes over Zoom, and everybody had their cameras off and mics off, and and I couldn't imagine being that professor. And I will say that coming out of COVID, like when we started coming back to the physical classroom, 2021, 2022, it was still very strange, but I remember a lot of professors just wanting to move right past it, being like, we're back in the classroom, finally. I was tired of being over Zoom. And it was like, you do remember why we were over Zoom, right? This is very strange that you were so excited to be back. But I also kind of understand, you know what I mean? When you are looking at a Zoom screen and you are talking into a void of just names with crossed out mics, that it's just like, who are you talking to? Who's paying attention to me? Who am I? Who's listening? And it's just talking into a void. And now but I also can't imagine that it's any different than talking into a void of people with masks on that are looking at you like, I'd rather be home on Zoom. It was very, I don't know. COVID was such a strange time.
So do you feel as though even through COVID, that college prepared you for the life that you currently lead? And I'm saying that in the broader sense of not just did it prepare you for your job, but for life. Did you leave college feeling like, I am ready to adult?
Yes, but I cannot say that college in particular is what did it. And I will elaborate. So throughout college, I could partly thank you for this. I have always been kind of
just partly
a go-getter.
Oh, okay. All right.
A go-getter. I feel like
is there a percentage in this partly? How much? 50, 78?
It's probably a good
97.6.
80%. I was gonna get 80%.
I'll take that.
Okay.
All right.
Well, okay. I say that as in I've also been told, and partly it's from my coworkers at this job, I've partly been told that I can be a bit of a workaholic sometimes when it comes to like my job that I really, really enjoy. And I can't 100% say that is a perfect trait to have. Because sometimes
never mind.
I'm struggling a little bit with my work-life balance, and I don't think that's a you thing. I think that is partly me.
It's okay. It's a me thing. I take it. I take what I've given you. I take what I've given you, and not necessarily the best way to be, but also not necessarily a bad way to be either.
Right.
I don't dislike working, and I don't dislike doing my job. So, I don't mind sitting around at 19 at night doing work.
Right.
It doesn't bother me at all.
Right. And I can say the same for my job. It's the same thing when you're passionate about your job. I don't mind being in my apartment at 7 p.m. talking about my job, nor do I mind, spending my weekends going through Pinterest and going through Instagram, finding new activities for my kids. I don't mind going to Michael's and Joann's and craft stores to pick up, these fun little items for my kids to use. I don't mind grabbing stickers for my kids at Five Below on a Saturday afternoon. I don't, because when I grab those stickers, I am really excited to see how my kids will like these stickers, right? It's part of that. And so I will say that throughout college, I felt that way with most of the things that I got involved in. I feel like the coursework in particular that came with college was all very literary heavy. And I did not end up going into a career that required a lot of those skills. I remember writing a lot of papers, doing a lot of mock exams, mock tests, and learning a lot about the assessments that come with being an early childhood educator. And I don't necessarily feel like that was, if I could do the whole college experience all over again, I think that I would take a totally different set of classes. And that's not to say that the classes that were required of me weren't a good baseline for some things, but I do feel like I left with a lot more questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't feel like I felt excited to get into the workforce, but I can't necessarily say that I felt well equipped to handle anything that came at me.
Mm-hmm. So, thinking about things that are coming at you, this election is coming at us.
I know.
And, you know, you being a part of me, you naturally have knowledge and an interest in civic engagement,
Right.
and our democracy and all of that. So I don't have to ask you if you're a voter, do I?
I vote every election.
Okay. I just want to make sure. All right. just
every
just
election since I turned 18.
Thank you. And I appreciate your support in our democracy.
Absolutely.
What issues right now in this election matter to you most? Like, what are you thinking about?
Oh Lord, what doesn't? Everything. I feel like this election in particular, and I feel like we say this every election, right?
Mm-hmm.
We say this every election where it's like, this election is the important one.
It's the most important election of our lives.
It is. And then
we
say that every year. I will say that every year, we say this election is the most important, right? But I feel like this election in particular, or at least what has happened politically and civically in the United States and abroad, has kind of put into question and put into perspective a lot of what our government represents and how our government has represented us. And I feel like we are starting to ask some really important questions. I feel like we ask important questions every year, but I feel like this year, at least from the social commentary I have seen online, talking to coworkers, talking to friends, talking to family, this is the election that, like, everyone is putting out the really big questions of, you know, is this how we want our government to represent us? Is this the issues, the way that they are handling the issues right now, the issues of, you know, international affairs, the issues of the economy, the issues of human rights, if we're being quite honest. A lot of those things have always been up for debate, but I feel like now the question is our government doing the job that they said they would? Is our government representing us in a way that is acceptable? And what do we do at this point to attempt to put one foot forward? And the only reason I say attempt is because, as much as I also think that this election, once again, is the most important election of our lives, I also feel like there's a lot of changes that a lot of people are hoping will come that I have a really hard time believing will come. Do you know what I mean? Because I feel like every election we have been given these promises by these politicians, by these candidates. And every
Yeah.
year we pick somebody to fulfill those promises. And then we're getting into this big debate of like, well, so and so didn't fulfill the promises that they made. And it's like, well, when does it stop? When do we officially decide that I'm tired of you not fulfilling promises? Because if this was like, not to dumb it down, but if this was a friend, right? If this was a friend and your friend was like, I'm going to be there for you, I'm going to be there for you, and then they don't show up
All the time.
all
Right.
the time, when do you officially decide it's like, well, we can't be friends anymore? I'm not
Yeah.
saying we should break up with our government, but also maybe it's time to reevaluate our choices. You know what I mean?
Well, they just may not be that into us, or we're not that into them. That certainly could be a thing. So
You
then,
know,
do you have hope going into this election year?
a little bit. I feel like every generation that comes before us, or every generation that comes after us, always has a much clearer vision for what the world should look like and what social change and justice looks like. That's not to say that all of the work that, you know, we have put in, or you have put in, or even generations before us have put in. That's not to say that work isn't important. That work is the pavement to keep us moving forward, right? We wouldn't be here if it weren't for the work that has already, been started. I do think that having conversations with people like Skylar, like my sister, I can see the power and I can see the vision. And if, the next generation is anything like Skylar, because Skylar is very much outspoken. She is not afraid to say what's on her mind. She is not afraid to fight for what is right. And I think that if we continue to hold those values with the generations moving forward, I feel like we can get to somewhere that is a better future. And that's what I hope to give as an educator. You know what I mean? I hope to give that hope to the next generations moving forward. My kids are 3 and 4. Right. They are not politically involved whatsoever.
But they will be. And when they are, it's going to be the most important election of their lives.
Absolutely.
When they vote, it's going to be.
2060, whatever.
Right. It's going to be the most important election ever.
It is.
You better start working on it now.
Right.
So you have been voting since you turned 18. So you were able to vote in the 2020 election and all of that. So, and you voted, also for some local folks where you live. Do you think that those you have voted for are concerned about the issues that matter most to you? Or do you want to break up with all of them?
Not all of them. I think some of them are. And I think that as I have gotten older, I will say that when I voted in 2020, I was not as well versed in doing the proper research. And I say the proper research, meaning going off of more than just the campaign ads and the debates. Because I think the debates and the campaign ads are important. But as I've gotten older, and especially coming into this election, looking at local folks, I have been looking more into what are they doing for the community. And I think before I wasn't doing that. I think that looking at what some of the folks that I voted for were doing for the community, I think some of them have very much at least attempted to stick to their promises. And I hate to say the government is rigged, but it's also kind of rigged, right? There's a lot of push and pull. There's a lot of barriers. There's a lot of pushback on a lot of the things that a lot of politicians and candidates want to do. And there's a lot of attempts, and I feel like the attempts are important. And so I do want to give them that credit, right? The politicians that have made some of these promises and are at least pushing to advocate for some of these things is really important. I will say that I've voted for people that I was like, I'm on the same page as you. And then they got to office and they were like, whatever, it's on the back of my list. And I'm like, okay, cool. You didn't actually care. That was just one of your talking points. Which is why I say I think that now being 24, because back in 2020, I was, 20, and a fairly fresh voter and having this newfound civic power that I wasn't entirely sure had that much power, because I think that growing up they're like voting is important, but especially with the 2020 election, I feel like everyone was like voting's not important because who cares, like where does my vote actually go, does it actually matter?
You think that was because of COVID?
Probably. I think that had a big thing to do with COVID. It probably also had a big thing to do with the 2016 election, which I was not able to vote in because I was not 18 at the time. But I will say the 2016 election left a lot of people very, very shaken, me included. And I think that it made me feel like, being on the cusp of 18 and getting ready to vote in that next big election, it was very scary for me because I was like, well, it feels like it doesn't matter, because I watched a whole bunch of people vote for a really important candidate and they didn't win anyway because of this, silly electoral college and all of these other strings that are being pulled in the background that like we don't even get to see.
And we discussed the electoral college a few episodes ago. If folks would like to go back to, I think episode 1 within Kinke.
Nice. It's important to know about those things. And I feel like even with that, 2016, I wasn't able to vote yet. And so it felt very scary learning that I would be able to vote soon. 2020 voted, which was technically my first major election. I voted in local ones before then. But 2020 being my first major one, the presidential one. And then now 2024.
It's time to do it again.
It's time to do it again, but I think that I have a very different perspective this round, right? I've been through COVID. I graduated from college. A lot has happened since that last election.
Right. So what issues matter to you now?
I think it's hard to pick just one. I feel like there are so many, and I don't even know.
You don't have to pick just one. You can tell me 4 of them if you want. If you want to give me some bullet points of what is a 24-year-old right now, a 24-year-old preschool teacher, what are your top ticket issues that you're thinking about as you are vying these candidates and vetting them?
I will say that in particular, as a 24-year-old Black queer preschool teacher with student debt, my biggest one of my biggest issues right now is the economy, right? Joe Biden made a promise to cancel student debt. My debt has not been canceled, and I don't make enough, right, to really justify paying how much I am paying in student loans, which was like the worst graduation gift ever, by the way, was getting done with college and then them being like, hey, so you owe us money.
Right. Right away.
They're like, hey, we heard you graduated. Congrats. So where's that, thousands of dollars you signed for? Which, by the way, I got the notice in the mail about my student loans, and it was crazy looking at the letter because they were like, your first payment starts, April 2024. And then they were like, the day you signed for the loan was in August of 2017. I was barely 18 at that point, barely 18. Which is crazy to think that I signed for so much money at barely 18, but it was like, they made me feel like I didn't have a choice. It's like, well, you want to go to college, right? You want to get a degree. You want to have a career, right? This is what you do. People go to college and they sign for thousands of dollars in loans, and then you just pay it back later. And then now I'm at the point where it's time to pay it back later. And so I think finances, but not just student loans, right? When we're talking about the economy, student loans, but also I don't make a lot as a teacher. And as you've mentioned, it's not a lucrative career. I I don't necessarily dream to be a millionaire, but it would be nice to know that I picked a career path that I could be financially stable in, that I could buy a house. It doesn't even look like I'd be able to buy a house one day. Like, that looks terrifying. And so when you're talking about, wages are not going up, but also inflation is happening, with just groceries and rent and, housing and all of these different things. It's becoming this question of, like, as a 24-year-old who has recently graduated college, and I don't know if the college degree I got is going to secure me to make sure that I can live stably and not just live, not just have a stable life for myself, but I want to grow a family someday. I want to, get married to somebody and, either adopt or have children or something. Like, I want to grow a family.
You want to have the options.
I want to have that option. And right now, financially, it feels like I won't, because I've, as much as I'm passionate about this career, the raises are not going to be substantial enough to make sure that I can pay for that. And, I'm thinking about hypothetical kids that want to go to college. How is that going to work? And that's scary, because I'm 24 and nowhere near ready to settle down and have children, but I don't know how my hypothetical children are going to go to college.
Right. I hear you. Side note, I went to the doctor's today, and the lady asked me, how was your holiday? And I said, oh, it was fine. And then I said, yours? And she said, fine. Kids enjoyed Easter, what have you. And I said, oh, that's nice. I said, well, mine are mostly grown. So,
yeah,
I don't really do that much anymore. And so she was like, oh, well, do you have grandkids? And I'm like, no. Said, they are just getting started. I said, we are not ready for that. We are not.
I can't. It's a collective.
I was just so like, that's where I am in life, where you're asking me if I have grandchildren. I'm like, well, dang.
Right.
Take a breather, ma'am. Can you take my blood pressure and keep it pushing? Thank you. We're done.
Blood pressure is getting high just thinking about it.
I know. I'm just like, don't come back in here.
Which is, I just think that's so funny, because I know people, right? There are people younger than me and people my age that are like, I'm pregnant, I'm getting married. And I'm just like, how? That's my first question. Is not why, because it's like, of course, that's great. Congratulations. But my first thought is like, how? I'm like, in this how are you doing that? How?
Well,
they're like, oh,
I don't know how I did it on the economy in which I did it with you. And I was much younger. So
I was going to say.
I think it's hard. I think whatever economy you're in, you just sort of figure it out. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it easy, but, everyone sort of pushes through.
Right.
And so I want to ask you about democracy and like in a nutshell, like, what does democracy mean to you?
Ooh, that's a heavy word, it's a heavy word, but it's also kind of funny because, right, my 3 and 4-year-olds are not politically involved right now, but this is the appropriate time, right, to teach them about how the government works. I believe that. And so we've been having conversations about democracy, and voting and how that works. Which, of course, right now to them is just the unfairness that when they get outvoted on something, that there's nothing else that can happen. Because it's all simple stuff, right? We're voting, what song do we want to have our dance party to today? And I give them 2 options, and more kids vote for, Shake Your Sillies Out. Right? I wish I could play Beyonce in the classroom. But more kids are voting for Shake Your Sillies Out than Old MacDonald Had a Farm. And then all the kids that wanted Old MacDonald Had a Farm are really upset about it, because they're like, that's what I wanted, and
that's their jam.
What I wanted, right? And so when we're having those conversations of like, unfortunately, when we're voting and we get outvoted, we have to be okay with our options. There's an irony to that, right? When you get into a bigger conversation of democracy and our government, because theoretically, the idea is supposed to work in the same way. We're all voting. Whoever gets outvoted has to be okay with the outcome. But when you're talking about it from the perspective of the US government, a lot of the things that are being outvoted number one, are ideals that don't represent us. And a lot of the times you have to question who's being outvoted and who are the majority of the votes and who do they actually represent. I feel like it gets more complicated when you talk about it from the US government perspective, because you're getting into this conversation of privilege, right? A lot of the bills that are being passed and a lot of the conversations that are being had in our current democracy are issues that benefit, you know, the people in positions of power. A lot of the economic issues right now are just that people can't afford food. And a lot of what's being voted on and a lot of what's being passed is more or less to benefit the people in positions of power who already have money. And so when you're talking about it from a perspective of, that's all I can think of when it comes to stuff like this, is just privilege. It's just privilege, because when you have that privilege, you have that power, right? And when you have that privilege and that power, who is being left behind? And the people that are being left behind are the majority that are dealing with the majority that are dealing with the aftermath. You know what I mean? And so I can't say that I feel like I am being properly represented, because I've even had conversations about like the people that have been voted into positions of power that I felt like represented me, and then, you know, they end up with that privilege and power and it kind of corrupts them. And it ends up being that, you know, I no longer feel represented, even though at one point I did.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel like we have democracy?
Not in the simplistic way, not in the way that I teach my kids, not in the way that, because if it really was this idea that, you know, you have these options, we vote for the options, and whatever the outcome is, we have to be okay with it, that I think that would be, you know, that would, it is what it is at that point. Then it would be a question of like, well, do I want to live in the US if this is what the majority feels like, if this is what's being represented? Because if it's legitimately that the majority feels this way and wants these things, then it becomes a bigger conversation of like, well, where do I fit in? Do I fit in here, or do I need to fit in somewhere else? However, when you think about it, becomes 10 times more complicated when you think about it from the perspective of our US government and our society, who, you know, for hundreds and hundreds of years has always been represented by the same privilege and power. It's the system in itself doesn't function the way that it was meant to. And I don't necessarily think that our democracy is what we think it is. I don't think it's what we teach in schools. I think that when you talk about the way the government works and the way democracy works, and when you talk about it in the general sense, the way we teach it in US history, you are taking away the years of, you know, anti-Black legislature. You're talking about taking away anti-queer legislation. You're talking about misogynistic legislature. You are neglecting to tell the whole story. Who was really representing the US? Who's really representing the ideals of the nation, right? Which isn't who lives here now.
Right. So I want to ask you this one last question before we wrap up. And I think it's a question that I asked Skylar. More or less. I said, where do you see yourself in 20 years?
20 years?
20 years. Because then you'll be my age. So
I will be.
The question. That's the question. That's the question I asked Skylar. You know, where does she see herself in 24 years? So for you, where do you see yourself in 20 years?
In 20 years. I would hope that my job still feels as fulfilling as it does now. I think I love my job. I don't think that I only love it because it's new. I think that I legitimately love what I do. I hope to expand on, or I hope that by that time I have expanded on what I do. I have always been interested in the research in learning through play. I would hope that I have, a family established, that I feel that I have established myself in a place, in a community that, I want to grow older in. I have always been a fan of the idea of settling down and starting a family or getting married or being in a community that, I could grow old in, that I could sit on my porch.
Drink some lemonade.
Just right in a rocking chair and just enjoy where I am. I have always enjoyed that vision of not necessarily the white picket fence, but the big porch that you sit on and my kids are in the front yard and they're playing, and, the people that are important to me are nearby, and I feel, that that's the place that, I can call my forever home. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that sounds beautiful, honey. That sounds absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
So thank you. I want to thank you for this conversation that I think is absolutely amazing, because I could be biased. I'm not, but I could be biased. But I think you are one of the smartest people in the whole wide world. And I think you are the best teacher in the whole wide world. And I told you before that, I would have let you teach my children. So, including you, because I don't think we have enough people who truly love and have just a natural inclination and even a maternal sense to teach the way that you do. And I am appreciative of it. And I know that people that you are teaching their children appreciate it. And I'm so glad you're doing this. I'm so glad you're following your dreams, no matter how much money it makes you, that I think you'll still be happier. You'll be happier than many other people who make a lot more money, because you are doing something that you love. And so I'm grateful to you, and I admire you, and I'm so proud of you. I'm so very proud of you each and every day. And yeah, I could gush about you a little bit longer, but I won't. Because the others may have something to say about it later. So we'll deal with that later. But Shay, teacher Shay, my sugar cookie, I love you. And thank you so much for being on Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington.
Thank you for having me. I had so much fun.
I know I had fun too. So cute. So cute. Okay. Goodness. Oh, shoot. I forgot to mention, we have an email. So people can email us about this conversation or any other conversation that you've heard on Sticky Note Conversations. And it's stickynote@makeitworknevada.org. stickynote@makeitworknevada.org. Please like and share and join us for the next conversation. And if you have thoughts about people I should have a conversation with, or if you think you want to have a conversation with me, send us an email. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington. Hosted and executively produced by Erika Washington, with music, mixing, and editing by Black Gypsy LLC. Special thanks to KUNV 91.5 in Las Vegas. This show is powered by Make It Work Nevada, a project of Tides Advocacy.